The morning sun was soft that day, peeking through the curtains and filling the small living room with a gentle light. The neighborhood was quiet, just the way he liked it. Birds sang on the tree outside, and a cool breeze carried the smell of freshly cut grass. Inside, the man stood near the front door, tying his shoelaces with steady hands. His dark suit was neatly pressed, and a badge clipped near his belt caught the sunlight for a second before he covered it with his jacket. He was calm, focused, and ready for another day at work. No one in that peaceful street would have guessed that he was an FBI agent. He liked keeping it that way, simple and quiet. His neighbors thought he worked in government security, and he never corrected them. The less they knew, the safer they were. As he reached for his car keys, his wife called out from the kitchen, reminding him not to skip breakfast again. He smiled faintly and promised he'd grab something on the way. He kissed her goodbye, then stepped out of the door, pulling it shut behind him. The air outside was fresh, but something felt off. Maybe it was instinct, that sharp, uneasy feeling that years of field training had taught him to trust. He paused near his car, scanning the street. Nothing seemed out of place at first. Kids were riding bikes, a dog barked somewhere in the distance. Then, from the corner of his eye, he noticed a black sedan parked across the street. Before he could react, 2 police cars turned the corner, their sirens off, but their movements quick and purposeful. They screeched to a stop, blocking both ends of the street. Doors opened fast and armed officers poured out. "Hands where we can see them," one shouted. He froze for half a second, stunned by how sudden it all happened. His first thought was that there must have been a mistake. His second thought was that maybe one of his undercover investigations had gone wrong. He slowly raised his hands, trying to stay calm. "Officers," he said, "there must be some kind of misunderstanding. Turn around and get on your knees." The tone left no room for negotiation. Neighbors started peeking from behind curtains and doors. Some came out to their porches, whispering to each other, their eyes wide. His wife heard the shouting and ran outside, her face pale. "What's going on?" she yelled. "Why are you arresting him?" One officer grabbed her by the arm, telling her to step back. She tried to show them his badge, yelling that her husband was with the FBI, but the officer snatched it from her hand and waved it dismissively. "This is fake," the officer said. "You're not fooling anyone with this." The man's heart pounded. He kept his voice steady. "That's a federal badge. You can verify it with the Bureau." "My name is—" "Quiet," one of them barked, pushing him to the ground. The cold pavement scraped his cheek. He could hear his wife crying, begging them to listen, but they weren't. They cuffed his wrists tightly, reading him rights he didn't deserve to hear. "You're under arrest for identity fraud and possession of illegal materials." Possession? Fraud? His mind raced. None of this made sense. He tried to speak, but they dragged him up roughly and shoved him toward one of the cars. His wife shouted again, trying to run toward him, but another officer blocked her path. "We're taking him in for questioning," the officer said flatly. "If he's innocent, he'll be released." Before the man could say another word, the door slammed shut behind him. Inside the police car, the sound of the locks clicking felt final. Through the window, he could see his wife standing on the driveway, hands shaking, tears running down her face. She was yelling something, but he couldn't hear. The car pulled away, leaving the street behind. His thoughts were racing now. He had worked for the Bureau for almost 10 years, always careful, always by the book. He'd just closed a big undercover operation involving cybercrime, a case that had exposed a group of hackers who'd been stealing classified data and selling it. He'd made enemies, but he never thought they could strike this close. As the car moved through traffic, one of the officers in the front seat looked back at him. "You thought you could play federal agent, huh?" "We got a call from the Bureau. They've never heard of you." The man's pulse quickened. That wasn't possible. His records were secured under federal protection. Unless someone had erased him. He leaned back, breathing slowly. His training kicked in. Panicking wouldn't help. If someone had managed to delete his data from federal servers, this wasn't just a small-time hacker. This was someone inside the system. At the police station, they let him inside, still cuffed. People stopped and stared, even other officers. Someone whispered, "They caught that fake FBI guy." Another laughed. They placed him in a small, cold interrogation room. A metal table stood in the center, a camera blinking in the corner. 2 detectives entered, one tall and stern, the other younger, his expression a mix of curiosity and doubt. The older one tossed a folder on the table. You've got guts walking around pretending to be a federal agent. You even made fake IDs. Impressive. The man stared at the folder. Inside were photos of him, his home, even his car. But the documents looked altered. The data mismatched, numbers swapped. Someone had fabricated everything. I'm not pretending, he said calmly. My name is Daniel Ross. I'm an agent with the FBI Cyber Division. You can call. The older detective cut him off. We already did. Nobody by that name works there. Daniel studied the detective's face. You called using what number? The detective frowned. The contact listed in your so-called file. Daniel's stomach dropped. Whoever had set this up was several steps ahead. They'd planted false files, fake contacts, and wiped his identity clean. Look, Daniel said, leaning forward, his voice steady. Someone's framing me. I've been investigating a network that— Save it, the detective interrupted. You'll have plenty of time to talk when the feds themselves confirm it. The door slammed shut behind them as they left him alone. He sat quietly, staring at the blank wall. Years of discipline taught him patience, but this was different. He wasn't in control anymore. He thought about his wife. She must be terrified. He had to find a way to contact someone he trusted in the bureau. Hours passed before the door opened again. The younger detective walked in alone this time, holding a tablet. He didn't speak for a moment, just stared at Daniel like he was trying to figure him out. Finally, he said, "Can I ask you something? If you really are who you say you are, why would someone erase your record?" Daniel met his eyes. Because I was getting too close to the truth. The detective looked uneasy. That's what everyone says. Daniel nodded slowly. Then check my fingerprints. Don't use the local system. Run them through the national database. If you're wrong, I'll confess to everything. But if I'm right, you'll see who's being fooled here. The detective hesitated, then quietly left the room. For a long time, Daniel sat in silence, his thoughts drifting between frustration and hope. He knew the evidence would prove him right, but time wasn't on his side. If the people who framed him realized he was still alive and in custody, they could interfere again, or worse. Outside the room, the young detective sat at his computer, fingers tapping nervously. He entered Daniel's fingerprints into the system and waited. The loading bar crawled forward. His heart beat faster. When the results finally appeared, he froze. His face went pale. On the screen, in bold letters, it read, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Active Agent, Clearance Level 5. The detective swallowed hard, staring at the photo on the screen. It was Daniel, no doubt about it. Everything matched. The man they'd arrested wasn't an imposter. He was one of the highest-ranking field agents in cybercrime. He leaned back in his chair, breathing heavily. Around him, the buzz of the station continued, but he barely heard it. He realized they had made a terrible mistake, and not just any mistake. They had arrested an FBI agent. In that moment, fear replaced doubt. He knew what would come next. Questions, investigations, possibly careers ruined. He had to tell the chief immediately. Back in the interrogation room, Daniel was still waiting, staring at the reflection in the one-way mirror. He didn't know yet that the truth was already on its way to being uncovered, but deep down he felt it. That same instinct that had warned him earlier that morning. Something was about to change. He just didn't know how big it would be. The young detective stood frozen at his desk, staring at the computer screen as if it had just shown him a ghost. The room around him suddenly felt too quiet. Every sound, the phone's ringing, the footsteps, the chatter, faded into the background. He reread the line on the monitor again and again, hoping he was mistaken. But it was clear. The man sitting in their interrogation room wasn't a fraud. He was a real FBI agent. For a moment, panic rushed through his chest. His throat went dry. What were they supposed to do now? He turned toward the chief's office. The older man was on a call, laughing about something, unaware that his entire station had just made one of the biggest mistakes of their careers. The detective hesitated before knocking. The chief waved him in, still holding the phone. "What's up, kid?" he asked casually. The detective swallowed hard. "You need to see something, now." The chief ended the call with a sigh and walked over. When he saw the screen, his smile vanished. His face slowly lost all color. "Is this real?" "Yes, sir," the detective said quietly. The prints matched. "He's in the system. Top clearance level. The chief stared at the information in silence. The truth hit him like a punch. He rubbed his temples, muttering under his breath. Oh no, oh no. This is bad. He looked up sharply. No one else sees this. You understand me? Not a word. The detective nodded, but his conscience was uneasy. Sir, we can't just keep him locked up. He's one of us. The chief paced the room. We'll fix this. But first I need to find out how the hell this happened. He picked up the phone and called Internal Affairs, but something strange happened. The person on the other end claimed not to have access to any record of the agent. The chief's brow furrowed. That's impossible, he said, his voice rising. I'm looking at it right now. But when he gave the case number, the voice on the line went cold. Sir, that file doesn't exist. Are you sure you're not being misled? The call ended abruptly. The chief set the phone down slowly. For the first time in years, he felt real fear in his gut. Something was wrong, very wrong. Meanwhile, in the interrogation room, Daniel sat quietly, his hands still cuffed. He had no idea that his fingerprints had already cleared him. He kept his breathing steady, replaying the events in his mind. Every detail, every voice, every car plate he could recall. Whoever had done this to him had access to both federal and local systems. That meant inside help. The door opened suddenly, and the young detective stepped in, holding a bottle of water. His face looked different now, not angry or suspicious, but uneasy. He set the bottle on the table. Here, he said softly. Daniel looked up, studying his face. Something changed, he said quietly. You found something, didn't you? The detective hesitated, glancing at the camera in the corner. Just drink your water, he whispered. Daniel didn't move. You saw it, didn't you? My record. The young man didn't answer, but his eyes said enough. Then he turned and left quickly, closing the door behind him. Minutes later, the chief entered the room. He was sweating slightly, trying to maintain control of the situation. Agent Ross, he began, forcing a smile, seems there's been a misunderstanding. Daniel looked at him steadily. A misunderstanding? You raided my home, arrested me in front of my family, accused me of crimes I didn't commit. His tone was calm but carried quiet anger. That's more than a misunderstanding, Chief. The chief sighed heavily and pulled out the chair opposite him. Look, I admit things don't look good, but you have to understand we were acting on what we thought was verified information. Someone sent us orders with your name, your picture, and a full background check. It all looked official. Daniel leaned forward. Where did those orders come from? The chief shook his head. That's what I'm trying to figure out. The system says they came from federal headquarters, but when I called the bureau, they said there's no record of you. Daniel's eyes narrowed. That's because someone erased me. I've been tracking a network for months. People who hack into government systems and sell classified data. They must have found out who I am. The chief frowned. Are you saying this goes beyond my department? Daniel gave a short nod. Way beyond. The chief sat back, rubbing his face. All right, let's say you're telling the truth, which honestly I believe now. What do you expect us to do? You're technically still under arrest, and if I try to release you without authorization, I'll lose my badge. Daniel took a slow breath. Then follow the rules. Run a background check again. Use the secure federal channel, not the regular one. It's encrypted differently. The chief looked unsure. And if I do that? Then you'll see the truth, Daniel said. The chief hesitated but finally nodded. He called over his assistant and ordered the secure system activated. Within minutes, the terminal connected to the FBI's internal database. The chief entered Daniel's ID manually. The loading wheel spun, then stopped. A file opened. Clearance level 5. Status active. Mission confidential. The chief stared at the screen. His face turned pale. You weren't lying. Daniel didn't smile. No, I wasn't. But before they could speak further, the office phone rang sharply. The chief picked it up, still staring at the monitor. Yes? His expression changed as he listened. Who? What do you mean transfer? By whose order? He looked up at Daniel, frowning. They're saying you're being moved to a federal holding facility in an hour. But that doesn't make sense. If you're one of them, why would they move you? Daniel's stomach tightened. Because it's not them. It's the people who set me up. The chief covered the receiver. What do I do? He whispered. Delay them, Daniel said quickly. Tell them you need to finish paperwork, anything. Don't let them take me. The chief nodded slowly. All right. I'll buy you time. He hung up and turned to his staff. No one touches that prisoner until I say so, he ordered. Then he leaned closer to Daniel. I'll stall them, but you'd better give me something solid, proof, anything. Daniel nodded. I have it. But it's encrypted. Where? In my belt, Daniel said quietly. There's a small metal chip inside the lining. It contains everything. If you can access it, you'll understand. The chief blinked. You've been carrying evidence on you this whole time? I couldn't risk storing it anywhere else, Daniel replied. The chief called for a technician to perform a property check, pretending it was standard procedure. When they removed the belt, the technician found the small chip embedded near the buckle. It looked ordinary, but once connected to a secure computer, lines of code and encrypted data began to appear. The young detective watched as the system processed the files. It's asking for a key, he said. Daniel gave him a number from memory. The detective entered it. Within seconds, the screen filled with names, transaction records, and coded messages, evidence of massive corruption. The chief leaned in, reading each line. His face turned white. These are police departments. Federal contacts. Even city officials, Daniel nodded grimly. That's the network I was investigating. And someone in your chain of command is part of it. The young detective looked from the screen to the chief. Sir, what do we do? The chief swallowed hard. We do nothing until I know who I can trust. Daniel met his eyes. You can trust me. For a long moment, the chief didn't speak. Then he nodded. All right. You'll get your chance to prove it. But you stay here in this building until I sort this out. No one else knows who you are, and I'll keep it that way. Daniel agreed. Just make sure my wife knows I'm safe. She saw everything. I'll handle it, the chief promised. As the chief left the room, Daniel leaned back, letting out a slow breath. For the first time since his arrest, he felt a small piece of control returning, but deep down he knew this was far from over. Whoever orchestrated this was powerful, and they weren't about to stop now. Outside, the young detective stood watching through the glass. His hands were trembling slightly. He'd joined the force to uphold justice, but now he was realizing how blurry that line could be. He whispered under his breath, What have we gotten ourselves into? Hours later, as night fell, the police station grew quieter. But somewhere in the distance, a black SUV rolled through the dark streets, its windows tinted, its lights off. Inside, a voice spoke into a phone, calm and certain. He's still there, the voice said, but not for long. Back at the station, Daniel sat alone in the dimly lit room, unaware that the real danger was already closing in. The lights in the police station flickered as the night dragged on. Most of the officers had gone home, leaving only a few on duty. The place felt tense, heavy, like everyone knew something big was about to happen, but didn't want to say it out loud. The chief sat in his office, staring at the computer screen that still showed the files from Daniel's chip. Every name, every detail. It was all too real. High-level officials, federal contacts, and even some local officers were on the list. He rubbed his forehead and sighed. The longer he looked at the evidence, the worse it got. Whoever had built this network had money, power, and access to everything. He turned toward the window that overlooked the holding area. Daniel sat inside, calm and silent, like a man who'd already seen too much of the world to be surprised anymore. The chief picked up the phone and called one of his trusted men. Keep an eye on him, he said quietly. No one comes in or out without my say. After hanging up, he leaned back and tried to think. He knew they had to go through the data properly, but time was running out. That mysterious call about Daniel's transfer still echoed in his mind. Someone powerful wanted this man gone, and soon. Meanwhile, in the holding room, Daniel sat at the metal table, his hands resting loosely in front of him. The quiet gave him space to think. He had spent years working undercover, but this felt different. He wasn't chasing criminals now. He was surrounded by them, and some of them were wearing badges. He thought about his wife and how scared she must have been watching him get taken away. He wished he could tell her he was okay. He knew she'd never sleep until she saw him again. A sudden sound broke his thoughts. The door opened, and the young detective stepped inside. His face looked tense, his eyes darting around as if to make sure no one followed him. I shouldn't be in here, he said quietly. They're watching everything. Daniel leaned forward. What's going on? The detective pulled up a chair. We got another call about you. Someone high up is demanding you be moved tonight. The chief's trying to delay it, but they're getting angry. Daniel frowned. Did they say where they're moving me? Some federal holding site downtown, the detective said, lowering his voice. But the chief checked. It doesn't exist. Daniel felt a cold chill run through him. Then it's a setup. If I leave this station, I won't make it there. The detective nodded, his expression uneasy. That's what I thought. Daniel looked him straight in the eye. You believe me now? The young man hesitated, then said quietly, I do. Daniel's tone softened. Good. Then listen to me carefully. There's a chance we can stop this, but we need to act fast. That chip you saw, it's only a fraction of what I collected. The rest is stored on a secure server under my bureau ID. If we can access it, we'll have proof strong enough to expose whoever's behind this. The detective shook his head. We don't have clearance for that kind of access. You don't, Daniel said. But I do. I just need one computer with an open line to the Bureau's secure network. The detective looked conflicted. If anyone finds out I helped you, Daniel cut in gently, you'll be saving lives. You think this stops with me? These people are inside the system. If they can erase a federal agent, they can erase anyone. The detective stared at him for a long moment before finally nodding. All right, follow me. They moved quietly through the back hallway, avoiding the main corridor where two officers were talking. The detective led him to a small office that belonged to the tech division. It was dark except for the glow of a computer screen. He closed the door softly and motioned for Daniel to sit. Make it quick, he whispered. If someone checks the logs, I'm finished. Daniel typed fast, his fingers moving with certainty. He entered a long string of codes and passwords until a secure access window appeared. Here it is, he said. The system loaded several encrypted files marked Operation Silent Grid. When the detective leaned closer, his eyes widened. This is huge, he muttered. There are links between law enforcement, private companies, even political names. Daniel nodded grimly. They've been selling access to classified systems. Every arrest, every operation, it all gets leaked before it happens. I was tracking their central node when they turned on me. Suddenly, the computer beeped. A message flashed across the screen. Unauthorized access detected. System lockdown initiated. Daniel cursed under his breath. They found us. The detective rushed to the door and peeked out. Down the hallway, two figures were walking quickly toward them. They're coming, he said. Daniel closed the window, pulled the chip from the port and slipped it into his pocket. We have to go. They slipped out through the back door, moving fast but quietly. The detective led him to a side exit that opened into the parking lot. The air outside was cold, the sky dark except for the faint glow of the city in the distance. Where do we go now? The detective asked. To the chief, Daniel said. He's the only one who can hold them off long enough. They ran across the lot and re-entered through the back hallway. But before they reached the chief's office, they heard shouting. The chief was standing in his doorway, facing two men in black suits. Their tone was sharp and commanding. We have orders from higher up, one said. The prisoner is being transferred under federal jurisdiction. The chief's jaw tightened. Show me the order. The man handed over a printed document with a seal, but something about it looked wrong. The chief studied it for a moment before shaking his head. This isn't federal format. Who sent this? That's classified, the man replied coldly. Daniel and the detective stayed hidden behind the wall listening. I'm not releasing anyone without direct verification, the chief said firmly. The other man stepped closer, his tone threatening. You don't have a choice. Daniel stepped out from behind the corner. He does. The men turned sharply. Their eyes widened when they saw him standing there. The younger detective moved beside him, hand near his holster but not pulling it yet. The taller man's face went pale. How did you— Doesn't matter, Daniel said calmly. You've been caught, and if I don't report in within the next hour, my data will be released to every major federal office in the country. It wasn't entirely true, but it made them hesitate. The chief glanced at Daniel, realization dawning in his eyes. You're bluffing, the suited man said. Try me, Daniel replied. For a long second, no one spoke. Then the two men backed off slightly. "This isn't over," one of them said before turning and leaving. As soon as the door shut, the chief exhaled heavily. "I've been in law enforcement for 30 years, he said slowly. "I've never seen anything like this." Daniel nodded. "You just saw how deep it goes." The chief looked at him seriously. "What do you need from me?" "Time," Daniel said. "I need to contact someone at the bureau who can verify my identity without going through the system. If I can reach her, she'll confirm everything." "Then you'll have it," the chief said. "I'll lock the station down. No one gets in or out." He turned to the detective. "Stay with him. You're responsible for his safety." "Yes, sir." The chief left the room, barking orders to his staff, and soon the sound of locks clicking echoed through the building. Daniel sat down, breathing deeply. The adrenaline was still rushing through his body, but he knew they'd just bought themselves a little time. He pulled out a small encrypted phone from his coat. "Let's hope this still works," he murmured. The detective watched as Daniel typed a code and waited. The line clicked, then a woman's voice came through. "This is Bureau Secure Line. Identify." "It's Ross," he said. "Code Delta 39. There was silence for a moment. Then the voice said, "We thought you were dead." "Not yet," he replied. "Listen carefully. The network's deeper than we thought. They've infiltrated law enforcement and maybe higher. I need a retrieval team, quietly. Send them to my location, but make sure they're clean." "Understood," the voice said. "Hold tight." The call ended. Daniel leaned back and let out a slow breath. The detective looked at him. "So that's it? We just wait?" Daniel nodded. "For now. But when they realize they lost track of me, they'll come harder." The detective looked uneasy. "And if your people don't make it in time?" Daniel gave a faint smile. "Then we improvise." Hours later, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed in the distance. The chief looked out the window, his stomach tightening. A convoy of black cars pulled into the parking lot. No markings, no lights. He glanced at Daniel. "Are those your people?" Daniel's face darkened. "No, those aren't mine." The chief's hand went to his weapon. "Then whose are they?" Daniel stood, his expression turning cold. "The people who don't want the truth getting out." When the officers realized who Daniel really was, the air in the room changed completely. Minutes ago they had treated him like a criminal, but now they stood frozen, unsure of what to say or do. The chief of police looked pale, his hands slightly shaking as he turned toward Daniel, who sat quietly, still in handcuffs. The silence stretched for several long seconds before Daniel finally spoke, his voice calm but heavy. "You should call the bureau," he said quietly. "Ask for Director Hayes. Tell him you have Agent Daniel Ross in custody." The chief swallowed hard, nodded quickly, and ordered one of his men to make the call. The others avoided Daniel's eyes, embarrassed and guilty. No one expected the situation to flip so suddenly. They had just discovered that the man they arrested was not a con artist or an imposter, but a real federal agent. Daniel's hands were still cuffed, but his posture remained strong. He wasn't angry, only focused. His mind was already racing through what must have gone wrong. Someone had set this up carefully. Someone with enough access to erase his record, falsify his ID check, and plant evidence against him. That kind of precision wasn't random. It came from inside knowledge. A young officer, the same one who ran the fingerprint check, nervously approached and unlocked the cuffs. "Sir, I'm really sorry," he muttered. "We had no idea." Daniel nodded slightly. "I know you were following orders, but this is bigger than any of us." When the chief returned, he looked even more unsettled. "Director Hayes confirmed your identity," he said quietly. "He also said you've been working an ongoing investigation that might involve law enforcement leaks." Daniel met his eyes. "That's correct. And I think you just walked into it." The chief's expression changed, confusion mixed with fear. "You mean someone here is part of it?" Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked around the room. Every officer was watching him, some nervous, some curious, others defensive. "Someone here sent a fake report to have me arrested. They wanted to shut me down before I got too close." The chief rubbed his forehead. "My God, we'll cooperate, of course. Whatever you need." "I'll need full access to the arrest orders and any communication tied to my name," Daniel said. "And I'll need it quietly." No one else should know, the chief agreed. Together they went into his office and started reviewing the electronic records. It didn't take long to find what Daniel expected. A transfer order, supposedly from the federal level, signed by an official who didn't exist. The fake transfer was scheduled within an hour of his arrest. Whoever set him up had been watching closely. As Daniel scrolled through the files, his eyes caught something. A local internal affairs signature at the bottom of the communication chain. That department had access to law enforcement systems across the state. It made sense now. The leak wasn't just local corruption. It was organized from the inside. He looked at the chief. "Who runs your internal affairs division?" "Captain Reed," the chief said slowly. "He's been with us over a decade. He's clean." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "No one's clean when money and power are involved. Trust me." Before the chief could respond, the young officer from earlier knocked on the door. "Sir, there's someone asking about the arrest," he said. "He says he's from internal affairs." The chief and Daniel exchanged a look. Daniel stood immediately. "Don't let him in here yet," he said firmly. "Tell him I'm being transferred downtown. Keep him waiting." The officer hesitated but nodded and left. Daniel turned back to the chief. "This is your league. If we play this right, we can catch him red-handed." The chief seemed nervous but agreed. "What's the plan?" Daniel pulled out a small device from his belt, a tiny encrypted chip. "You remember this from earlier? This chip contains field reports, encrypted case data, and communications between me and the Bureau. If I can get to a secure system, I can expose every connection this mole has." The chief led him to an older computer in the evidence room that wasn't connected to the public network. Daniel inserted the chip and typed in several access codes. For a moment, the screen was blank. Then slowly, lines of data appeared. Encrypted case files, emails, and surveillance logs. The chief leaned forward as the files started to decrypt. "This is incredible," he whispered. "This proves everything you've been saying." Daniel nodded. "It also proves someone's been feeding information to the very group I was investigating." He pointed to a name that appeared repeatedly in the communication logs. It was the same captain who had just arrived asking questions. Outside, they heard footsteps approaching. The chief moved quickly to shut the office door. Daniel backed up the data to the chip again. "We'll confront him, but not here," he said. "If he suspects we know, he'll run. I'll need to contact my team first." The chief's hands trembled slightly as he handed Daniel a secure radio line. Daniel spoke quietly into it, using a code phrase that only Bureau field teams would recognize. "Blue Falcon in position. Target confirmed. Need silent extraction within the hour." A voice on the other end responded with a simple, "Copy. Stay in position." Minutes later, the door opened again, and Captain Reed stepped in, pretending to smile. "I heard we made a big mistake," he said casually. "You must be the real Agent Ross." Daniel turned to face him. "That's right. Surprised?" Reed chuckled, but his eyes were sharp. "Just making sure everything's sorted. You know how these mix-ups happen?" Daniel studied him. The man looked confident, maybe too confident. "Mix-ups don't happen with forged federal signatures," he said quietly. "Or fake warrants issued under your login credentials." Reed froze for half a second, then forced a laugh. "You're mistaken." The chief stood up. "Daniel has proof, Reed. It's over." Reed's expression hardened. His voice dropped. "You think you know what's going on here, Chief? You have no idea how deep this runs." Daniel stepped closer, keeping his tone steady. "Then educate me. Because from where I stand, it looks like you've been feeding intel to the same group we've been trying to take down." Reed's jaw tightened. For a brief moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the old computer. Then suddenly, Reed turned and bolted out the door. Daniel chased after him without hesitation, the chief right behind. They ran down the hallway, past startled officers who had no idea what was happening. Reed pushed through a side exit and into the parking lot, fumbling for his car keys. Before he could start the engine, Daniel pulled open the driver's door and grabbed him. They struggled briefly, but Daniel managed to pin him against the hood. "It's over!" Daniel shouted. Reed glared at him. "You think taking me down will fix it? There are others. You can't stop them all." Daniel held his gaze. "Maybe not. But I can start with you." Within minutes, backup arrived. Local officers in a black SUV with tinted windows. From it stepped two agents Daniel recognized immediately, his own team. The sight of them brought a wave of relief. They quickly took Reed into custody. The chief looked shaken but grateful. I had no idea, he said quietly. He's been here for years, Daniel nodded. That's how it works. People trust the wrong ones because they wear the same uniform. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, Daniel sat in the chief's office reviewing the data one last time. His team confirmed that Reed had been passing information to a private group involved in smuggling and cybercrime. He wasn't working alone. There were connections reaching into neighboring cities, maybe even higher up. Daniel stared at the screen, feeling both satisfaction and exhaustion. We got one, he said softly. But the fight's not over. The chief leaned back in his chair. You're not planning to leave, are you? Daniel smiled faintly. No, not until this is finished. Outside, the station was quiet again. The same officers who once doubted him now looked at him with respect. Some approached to shake his hand, others simply nodded in apology. Daniel accepted their gestures with calm humility. As he walked out into the night, the cool air brushed against his face. He took a deep breath, thinking of his wife and how worried she must be. He wanted to go home, but he knew his work wasn't done yet. The corruption he uncovered was only a small part of something much larger. He looked up at the sky, the stars faintly visible through the city lights. Tomorrow, he whispered. Tomorrow we bring the rest down. With that, he walked toward the waiting bureau car, ready for whatever came next. He had been wrongly accused, humiliated, and betrayed, but he was still standing stronger than before. And now he wasn't just an agent on a mission. He was a man determined to make things right no matter how deep he had to go.